For those of you that remember watching MTV growing up, I've got bad news for you. It's dead. Well, okay, not entirely. Not the main channel. No, just the music channels. The ones that launched them. Yeah, those. Saw this video on YouTube the other day. Really blew my mind, taking me back to the early days of MTV.
What if I told you that the empire which invented modern cool just took themselves out on live TV? One minute you have a global monolith that dictated the fashion, language, and soundtrack of the entire planet, and the next you have a blank screen and a press release about cost synergy. They didn't lose the war to YouTube or TikTok. They surrendered decades ago when they decided that filming drunk people in a hot tub was more profitable than breaking the next Nirvana. Today, December 31st, 2025, the executioner finally arrived, and he wasn't wearing a leather jacket. He was wearing a suit and holding a spreadsheet. Here's how the most powerful brand in music history sold its soul for a reality show and then choked on the residuals.
I think we can all agree that MTV pretty much went downhill when The Real World came out.
The date is December 31st, 2025. While you're getting ready to ring in the new year, Paramount Global was busy burying your childhood. They just completed a merger with Skydance Media, and the new bosses needed to find $500 million in savings. They looked at the line at the ledger and saw music television and hit delete. As of today, the signal is dead. MTV 80s, MTV 90s, MTV Music, and MTV Live are gone. If you live in the UK, Europe, Australia, or Brazil, you can flip through the channels all night, but you won't find them. They didn't move to a new number. They were erased. The cause? Brutal and simple. Merger happens, suits need to save $500 million, niche music channels are deemed dead weight, and the plug is pulled. They left the flagship MTV channel running, but don't get excited. That channel hasn't played a music video since the Bush administration. It's a 24-hour nursing home for reality TV
The
reruns.
Bush
The channels
administration.
that actually played the hit.
Which Bush administration? W or HW? I mean, how far back are we talking?
The ones that kept the 80s alive are history. And the shutdown wasn't a surprise to the industry, but the final moments were hauntingly scripted. Several of music channels decided to go out with a piece of historical symmetry. MTV signed off by airing the Buggles' Video Killed the Radio Star, the very first video they played on August 1st, 1981. MTV 90s chose the Spice Girls' Goodbye, while MTV 2000s went out with NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye. It was a poetic, self-aware admission of defeat. They knew the war was over, and they knew they lost. To understand the magnitude of this death, you have to understand the violence of the birth. On August 1st, 1981, 12:01 a.m., the screen went black, and then we saw the footage of the Apollo 11 moon landing. But instead of an American flag, they planted a flag with a giant flickering M. The message was clear. Music wasn't something you just listened to anymore. It was a territory, and these guys just conquered it. The power was absolute. If a video was in heavy rotation, that band sold 1 million records, period. By 1984, MTV was the only thing that mattered. If you didn't have a video, you did not exist. This created the first big shift in causality. Labels stopped signing the best musicians, started signing the most photogenic ones. This era gave us the visual arts. Michael Jackson used MTV to turn Thriller into a global event. He understood that a 14-minute movie about zombies would do more for his career than 10 years of touring. This was the era where the budget for Hairspray exceeded the GDP of small nations. The mid-80s on MTV wasn't just a playlist, it was actually a lifestyle manual for excess. You had bands like Motley Crue, Rat, dominating the airwaves, not because they wrote complex stuff, but because they knew how to pose on a motorcycle. And this is how you get a band like Warrant. They were a perfectly serviceable rock band, but MTV turned them into a caricature with the Cherry Pie video. The image of the girl, the pie, the fire hose became more famous than the guys in the band. It was the
That was a pretty fucking awesome video. Okay? It was legendary.
peak of the hair metal bubble. Time when you could sell 1 million records just by having enough teas in your hair to block out the sun. But it wasn't just the rocker. This was the era of the world premiere. When Madonna released Like a Prayer, It wasn't just like a song dropping. It was like an international incident. Burning crosses, stigma, and Pepsi sponsorships getting canceled, chaos. And MTV was a conductor. They realized that controversy sold better than melody. They started to lean into the scandal. They created the VMAs not to hand out trophies, but to create moments. They wanted Madonna rolling around in a wedding dress. They wanted the fights and they wanted the noise. Every empire hits a point where the excess becomes liability. But in 1990, the audience was starting to get a sugar headache from all the glam. Spandex was too tight, the hair was too big, songs were too dumb. System was ripe for a crash. And that crash arrived in September of 1991. The video was Smells Like Teen Spirit. You know the image, the dark, hazy gym,
Yep.
janitors dancing, and a dude in a green striped sweater who looked like
Kurt Cobain killed hair metal.
he hadn't showered in 3 weeks. Kurt Cobain didn't look like a rock star. Looked like a guy who pumped your gas. MTV jumped on grunge with a predatory hunger. They realized that the cool kids were tired of the Sunset Strip. Cool in parentheses, that is. Why? Because now they pivoted. Overnight, they stopped playing Poison and Winger and started playing Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. This turned out to be a calculated business move. Hairspray was out, flannel was in. And this led to the creation of MTV Unplugged. This was the
And that's right around the time when I remember starting to watch MTV was bands like Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Metallica, this was probably the peak era of MTV, I think, right before its slow downfall a few years later.
ultimate causality win for the network. They took the loudest, most aggressive bands in the world, stripped away the electricity, and sat them on stools in front of candles. It was a high concept, cheap to produce, sold millions of albums. When Nirvana did it, it became a haunting, legendary piece of history. Got Kurt in the cardigan, surrounded by lilies, screaming, "Where did you sleep last night?" That was truly one of the quote-unquote holiest moments the network ever broadcast. The biggest mistake MTV ever made was a show called The Real World. In 1992, they put 7 strangers in a loft in New York City and filmed them 24 hours a day. It was an experiment. It was supposed to be a documentary about youth culture and turned out to be a goldmine. And the ratings for The Real World were massive. It was the birth of reality TV. But this is where the cause and effect chain gets really ugly. The Real World was a hit. MTV sees that personality drives ratings better than music at that point. They create more personality-driven shows like Road Rules and The Grind. They reduced the hours of music videos to make room for these shows. By 95, if you tuned in at 2 o'clock p.m., you weren't seeing the new Soundgarden video. You were seeing Puck from The Real World, San Francisco, picking his nose. The M in the logo was still there, but it was starting to feel like a lie. The network had found a drug that was cheaper and more addictive than rock and roll. And then came TRL, Total Request Live. Carson Daly stood in a glass studio in Times Square while screaming teenagers begged for the new Backstreet Boys video. But TRL was not about music discovery. It was about the fan base. Popularity contest played the same 10 clips from the same 5 boy bands every single day. You didn't see the whole video anymore. They played 30 seconds of I Want It That Way, while Carson Daly read a sign from a girl in the crowd that said, "I love you, Nick." The music had become background noise for the event of being famous. The network had weaponized cool again, but this time it was corporate cool. They're in bed with the labels to push Britney Spears, NSYNC, and Eminem. What it really came down to is that MTV did not give a crap about art anymore. They cared about the noise. They cared about the crowd in Times Square. They turned music into a commodity that functioned like a ticker tape on the stock market. And of course, the kids will tell you that the internet killed MTV. They'll say that YouTube and Spotify made the business model impossible. And sure, the tech changed, but it turns out that's a cop-out. MTV died because it stopped respecting the audience. They traded the music fans, the people who built the network, just like ATM machines, fractured the brand into a dozen different channels. You want the 80s? Pay extra for the classic package. You want the hits? Pay for the hits package. But the real killer arrived in 2005, and it was called YouTube. For 20 years, MTV's value was exclusivity. If you wanted to see the new Guns N' Roses video, you had to sit through 3 hours of commercials and wait for it. You were hostage to their schedule. YouTube made music video a search term. You want to see a video? You click the button. You didn't need a VJ to introduce it. You didn't need to see an ad for Clearasil. Now you just see a whole shit ton of ads for enlarging your member, or whatever the hell it is they decide to serve up. But YouTube offers instant on-demand music. MTV's heavy rotation becomes obsolete. MTV picked what you were going to see. So MTV abandons music entirely to focus on these long-form reality shows, Jersey Shore, Teen Mom.
I think there's still a place for MTV music like that. If they wanted it, I think it would still be possible.
The brand loses its cultural authority as a music tastemaker, and by the mid-2000s, MTV was a network for people who like to watch people be famous for being famous. The Hills, Laguna Beach, My Super Sweet 16. These shows were about excess and ego, but they had nothing to do with a guitar riff or a drum beat. The network that had once been the home of Smells Like Teen Spirit was now the home of Snooki. The final nail in the coffin wasn't a choice made by a kid in the dorm room. It was made by a boardroom that decided the legacy wasn't worth the overhead. When they announced closure of these channels, they didn't try to save them. Didn't try to pivot to a streaming model that respected the history. They just cut the cord. They saw the data, saw that the people who grew up on Headbangers Ball and 120 Minutes were now in their 40s, 50s, and decided they weren't a growth demographic. So basically like screw Gen X. They make YouTube videos and stutter too much. But the M is still there. Well, for now. The logo hasn't changed much, but the soul is totally gone. So, hats off to the VJs, and for the world premieres, and the days when a music video could actually change the world.
Wow. So that's what happened to MTV. Guess this really is the end of an era, folks.